that they can. Well, to kick us off tonight, we'll welcome our first guest, so Nick Tulloch from Mendell Helium. Nick, good to be speaking to you again. How are you? You're actually calling from holiday. I think this is the second time you're doing that.
I think it is actually. I think last time we spoke on one of these, I was in Portugal, and I am again. So but good evening. Yeah, good to chat, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your holiday schedule to talk to us tonight. So you've taken, been quite an active year for the company here. You've made quite a few steps forward in the helium space pretty quickly, really. But before we get into that, could you perhaps just tell us a little bit about the change at the company going from what was effectively, yeah, medicinal cannabis to helium, completely different. We only need a minute on that just to set the scene.
Well, yes, this time last year we were called Voyager Life. We'd built a business in plant-based health and wellness. We moved into helium, or was first moved into helium at the end of June last year when we took an option to acquire M3, which had or has a series of operating assets in Kansas. We've since sold the plant-based health and wellness business. We've renamed ourselves Mendell Helium. So the business is now all about what we do in Kansas and the wells that we have there.
So why did you choose to focus on helium then and helium production? What's that market like?
Well, it probably looks from the outside like quite a pivot, but it was a long-standing plan, and rather ironically, the team who came in alongside me to found Voyager back in the autumn of 2020 had previously, with me and with Paul Mendell and actually Eric Boyle, our chairman, we'd all looked at another helium asset in Kansas, and we'd got quite far down the line. And anyway, it wasn't quite right, and I moved on to set up Voyager, and the team came with me. And then here we are, sort of 4 and a bit years later. We've sort of come back to where we started.
Back
So
around.
it wasn't sort of quite sort of out of left field as perhaps it might have appeared, and it's an area that we've had a lot of interest in. But you said it yourself; it's all about production. I'd say that with any
Yeah.
natural resource, it's fascinating what you can do, but until you actually take it out of the ground, until you can sell it, you haven't really achieved your business plan.
Mm.
And the beauty, I think, of what we have in Kansas is we have access to infrastructure, and we are able to produce and therefore sell what we find.
Yeah. Is it fair to say you saw more upside on helium? I'm not going to say exploration, helium production effectively, and more, yeah, better value for investors.
I think it's better suited to the UK public markets. The UK's got a very strong small cap natural resources following. And when Voyager began, cannabis, CBD was very much in vogue. I'm really
Mm.
proud of everything we achieved there, but it was just not suited to the public markets. And the right thing to do was to sell it on, which is what we've done. We've given it a new home. Hopefully there'll be a bit of upside for our shareholders going forward. But to use the company that we have to focus on something different, and that's helium. And helium itself has also had a certain element of fashion. We're not the only helium company listed in London, but I often say we are the only helium company selling helium. We are taking it out of the ground every day. We are selling it every day, and so small quantities at the moment, but that's the start. And we've got some wells coming online that could really change the company quite significantly.
Yeah, we're going to dig into that in a lot of detail in a bit. First of all, Nick, Kansas. Why Kansas and why those assets in particular? Is it special for helium?
It is. So Kansas is home to part of the Hugoton gas field, which is one of the oldest gas fields in the US. It is certainly prospective for helium, and it has been for quite some time. And it's by far and away the easiest place I've operated in the United States. Very benign operating environment, very easy to deal with the state. Those of you who've looked at maps, completely flat, good weather conditions, so a great place to operate in.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for that. So, one of the more notable early developments was your farming with Scout Energy at the Hugoton gas field. So, could you tell us a little bit about the Hugoton gas field just to begin with? Then we'll focus on your asset, which is Rost.
Yeah, the Hugoton has been in production for over 90 years. It's if you looked at it on a map, it's like a backwards Italy. It's like a boot, but facing the other way, and it runs through Kansas, Oklahoma, and into Texas. I mean, we're obviously at the top end. Conventionally, in any large gas field, you drill in the center. This is the area that's most prospective for gas. We've done it slightly differently, and we're focused on what we call the transition zone, where the gas zones start to dip down below the water table. And again, conventionally, don't drill where there's water. The water will stop the gas coming out. But what we've proved is that you can dewater the wells, and when the wells are dewatered, you can produce a very successful well. And that's really where our partnership with Scout came in. Scout are not necessarily a household name in the UK, but over in the US, they are a very well-known onshore oil and gas business. In Kansas, or our part of Kansas, in the southwestern corner, they are the single biggest operator and run the main helium production plant or gas production plant called Jayhawk. So partnering with them is a huge part of our strategy in the Hugoton.
Okay, I know that's very important as well. And you said before they quite like dealing with the British guy. These kind of Americans like dealing with the British guy doing something a bit different. And you've got quite a good partnership there, where you've actually got first right of refusal, haven't you, on a vast area of land there to go for helium. We did a special feature on that. So you've got, is it 5 in production at the moment there?
We have 5 wells that currently produce. So the flagship well in the Hugoton is the Nilsson well, which was the subject of a very large frack. They're all on Scout land, under slightly different arrangements. The big farm out agreement that we put in place back in the autumn of last year relates to new wells, but not the existing wells. But you are right. I think when this sort of strange British guy with sort of pointy shoes and a funny accent turned up in the Scout office in Dallas, it probably did. It did make them sort of sit up and think, what on earth's he on about, and what does he want to work with us for? So we've formed a good relationship, and it's been a promising start over in that part of Kansas for us.
Good. And your focus now is on Rost. Do you plan to look back at the Hugoton in the future?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So we operate in 2 regions, both in the southwest part of Kansas. One is the Hugoton, which I spoke about a moment ago, and the second is Fort Dodge. So if you're into your westerns, Fort Dodge sits just outside of Dodge City, so get out of Dodge. We have 1 well there, which we're currently working to bring into production. And this is pretty special. This is a well that's been tested on several occasions, being prospective for in excess of 5% helium. It's also a very high pressure well. Like what we do in the Hugoton, it's wet, it will need dewatering. And what we've been doing of late is recompleting a disposal well, and that's been a huge success, so that we can take the water out of Rost and essentially put it back into the ground sort of 300 yards away in our Broby disposal well. Yeah. Rost, I think, is far and away the most exciting part of what we have at the moment. I'm not belittling the Hugoton. I mean, the Hugoton is a fascinating and very valuable long-term opportunity. But Rost is a well that could produce, as a 5% helium, very high pressure, and we think very conservatively could cover all of our operating expenses, all of our overheads, simply out of that 1 well. So drill Rost, produce Rost, and then carry on and produce other wells in the area. That's the near-term strategy for Mendell Helium.
And that drilling of that saltwater disposal well, so that's to dispose of the water that comes up when you're starting to produce from the helium from the Rost well. There's expected to be a fair bit of water that comes up with that. And that drilling, well, not drilling, that opening up of that existing Broby disposal well, that actually went much better than you expected, didn't it? I think you were able to get access to a reservoir that had more space in it, a higher level, and you're quite comfortable putting the water into that.
Exactly right. If you're dealing with a gas well that's got water in it, then the water has to go somewhere. You can't just spread it around on the surface. It has to be taken somewhere or permitted by the state. So your 2 options are: you can truck it, and there'll be a per barrel cost of trucking it to a location, or you can have a disposal well where you put it back into the ground. The volume of water we think we're going to produce in Rost is just way more than trucks could cope with. We wouldn't be able to get enough trucks sort of parked outside the well site in order to dispose of the water. So the smart move was to have a disposal well. And I always felt from the outset of this process, the single biggest risk for us was the disposal well, because if you can't get rid of the water, how will you get the gas out of Rost? So as you say, we've had a huge success with Broby. We had a rather sort of an emotional day about 2 weeks ago, where the first zone we tested actually put water back at us. So that didn't work. 6 hours later, we moved the packer 1 stage down, tested the second zone, and it took water like a sponge. So absolutely terrific. But what that means, and what you were alluding to, is we didn't have to go any further down. So going further down is time, and it's also money. So the Broby well was a big success, but it was also completed faster and more cheaply than it could have been. And we were able to use that saving, or that notional saving, to buy basically a better quality pump. And as I say, Rost is all about pumping the water, so having a good quality pump is absolutely critical.
And you've now got to get the permit to dispose, but I think you've said before that really is quite straightforward. Are there any, I mean, just confirm that, and are there any other hurdles in regulatory terms that you've got to overcome?
The permit is straightforward. I mentioned earlier about enjoying working in Kansas. We were able to phone up the relevant person in the State Department and talk to him about what was required for the well. He's confirmed over the phone there is no issue. So we've put in our application. It's a 30-day process, but what we've been told by Kansas is there by the state of Kansas is there is no problem. So we're very, very confident that the well will be permitted. As I say, it is taking water like a sponge, taking far more water than we're going to need for Rost, meaning in time, potentially the well could be used for the Broby well, that is, could be used for other production wells too. So no, we're very confident on that. In terms of other regulations, yes, there's a series of permits, but again, I go back to what I say. Kansas is a real delight to operate in, a very benign operating environment for oil and gas companies, and we've had no issues and don't expect any issues on that either.
Okay, good. Now, I did notice recently, I think on social media, Mendell were posting some, I think some videos, or there was certainly something that was showing the gas was flowing very well with not much water content. So, I mean, you said earlier that you thought the biggest risk was the entering of that disposal well, so not necessarily what is going to come out of the well. So I'm interested to understand that a bit more and what the early signs here that you're getting from the Rost well.
Yeah, I know the video you mean. There's a sort of a tap with a bucket and quite a lot of gas
Mm,
hissing out of it. The purpose of that is to demonstrate that even before we've dewatered Rost, there is gas coming out. Now, you would expect that if you have a reservoir of gas and then a body of water sitting above it, the water will seal the gas and you'll get very, very little gas coming out. The fact that when we open up the well and that there is gas coming out of Rost proves to us what we already know. We know that Rost is a very high pressure well, and we therefore believe that gas will come out at a very substantial flow rate. The fact that we're seeing that, or you can hear it on the video, the fact you can hear it and sort of see the water sort of spitting out of the tap, just proves the pressure that we're dealing with. And that's what it's all about. It's about the helium concentration. We know that's more than 5%, and it's about the pressure within the reservoir, and that'll produce the flow rate. So early signs, very, very good. Yeah, I say it was a really good week that week. Actually, Broby went better than expected. We've already seen gas coming out of the Rost well. So ticks in the box all round in terms of what we're looking to achieve.
so the pressure you talk about, is that really important then? Because does the pump not encourage the helium to come up as well?
The pump will remove the water.
The
Uh,
pump's for the
so,
water, right?
so
Okay.
yeah, you can. I mean, there's a variety of different things to do. Yes, you can sort of suck the gas out of the ground, but if the gas is rising up under its own pressure, and being drawn in from a wider reservoir, we would expect to have a greater volume of gas and produce a greater volume of gas.
Okay.
So you absolutely want to have downhole or reservoir pressure, and that is very much what we've got. I mean, all the measurements have demonstrated that, and that little video. I mean, it was taken quite late at night. It was just after the pump had been installed. It was taken quite late at night, and it's just a very sort of quick sort of 15-second illustration of what Rost can do. And bear in mind there are several hundred feet of water sitting above the gas reservoir, and you still
Right.
or saw or heard that gas coming out. So that's that's what's got the team so excited. I'm actually back out to Kansas next week, so I'll sort of see the next phase of the construction going on. But it's
Oh,
looking
very
good.
good.
It's looking really good.
And that gas coming up, that means that there's pressure there, which is only a good thing. And then what you
Yes.
would look, the next stage of work would look like, what, taking that first level of helium off and then getting to the water? Would you, yeah, do you know how what the next sort
Yeah.
of steps look like?
Do you know there is a theory on site, and this is totally unproven. There's a theory on site that actually the helium will have risen to the top of the gas mix. So what we're seeing come off at the moment is maybe sort of higher in helium than the overall reservoir. So there's even a sort of tongue-in-cheek idea of, well, look, can you capture the gas that comes off first, and can you sell that as a as a sort of semi-concentrated helium mix? I don't know. That's not going to define the company. That's just a bit of fun.
Okay.
But in terms of what we have, we have, let's say, a high pressure well, we have gas production, and the next step is to harness that gas. So We have a PSA on site that can purify the gas. Ultimately, it could purify the gas to 99.999%. We need to just see how the PSA runs and see whether it's sensible to take it to that level of purity, or to maybe take it to sort of 40 or 50%, and then truck the mix for final purification elsewhere.
Okay.
We have a number of people interested in taking the helium from us. Scout are one. We've announced that previously, but the Kansas community is not that big, and people are interested. This Rost well, with its high helium and high pressure, this has got people quite interested, and there are other helium processors who've expressed enthusiasm for taking the helium from us. So
Okay.
we're a few weeks away from sort of starting our own sort of mini price war, but it's quite nice to
Okay.
be wanted. And if you're a small company listed in London and you're operating in Kansas, and people are phoning you saying, we're interested in what you're doing, you start
Okay.
to feel that you're beginning to to create some ripples in the water.
And just before we go into that a bit more, you're fully funded to get Rost online and functioning.
We are. We
Yeah.
raised money in early April. We actually had a shareholder come in quite late as well, so we raised a tiny bit more at the start of May. But that funding does two things. It gets Rost into production, which is what we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes. It
Mm-hmm.
also enables us to explore the possibility of moving to AIM. We're on Aquis at the moment. Our peer group, our helium peer group, are for the most part all AIM listed, and I might say tongue in cheek, what we have that they don't is we have helium production. But in fairness, what they have that we don't is they have more liquidity in their shares. And so moving on to AIM is a key part of our strategy as well. So that's sort of the twin process we're operating. So I sort of spend half my day doing the interesting stuff of looking at what we're doing on Rost, and half my day looking at the audit and the legal diligence on the AIM process. But
Okay.
that's our objective for the coming months.
Okay. Okay. And I think you previously said as well that Rost would be capable of covering all of Mendell's overhead, even at a conservative valuation. So does this still remain the case?
Yeah, it does. We're not an expensive company to run. We tend to work mostly with consultants. We don't have a huge headcount. But even that aside, Rost itself, on some fairly conservative assumptions, could easily produce more than $100,000 a month of revenue. Now, bear in mind, this is a well that we have tested at 2,900 MCF a day, and the assumptions that I was using to get to $100,000 are under a tenth of that. So that kind of gives you an element of, I suppose, first of all, my conservatism. It's not my style to be making rash promises, but also the enormous potential that the Rost well has. So yes, that one single well could cover all of our costs, our salaries, our overheads, our advisor costs, and give us that springboard to go on and do more. And that's clearly the objective. If Rost goes as we think it will, then the next step is Rost number 2, Rost number 3, and so on. So
Yeah.
this
Okay.
is, again, I feel like I'm sort of talking away from the Hugoton. I don't mean to. I think the Hugoton is a very, very interesting opportunity for Mendell Helium. But I suppose the current excitement, or the near-term excitement, is at Rost. And if you have a well like Rost, it's, I don't want to say it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but one of our engineers did say to me it's the best development opportunity he's ever seen. So this is something that deserves to be focused on, deserves to be brought into production, and it very easily could become the making of this company.
And you say what 1/10 of the production would cover costs?
So no, one tenth of its maximum production. So
Okay.
on the original test, Rost was shown capable of producing 2,900 MCF a day, and to get to the $100,000 of revenue, I was only using 250 MCF a day. So less
Okay.
than a tenth of the maximum.
Okay.
The end result of Rost is probably going to be dictated by the capacity of the offtake. So if we're running the helium through a PSA, for example, the PSA is rated at 800 MCF a day. So
Okay.
so there's there's a ceiling. But
Okay.
also, you have to bear in mind that you don't want to run things to their full capacity 24/7. You wouldn't drive your car at 100 miles an hour 24/7. You give it a little bit of a rest. Same with the PSA, and there will be some downtime. So again, we are naturally conservative, we're naturally cautious, but even at those very small numbers, and hopefully I've demonstrated that 250 MCF is really a fraction of what this well has the
Yeah.
potential
Okay.
to do. Even at that low fraction, we can still cover all of our cost and then some.
That's really good to hear. So would your hope to be to cover all of your costs, so actually make all of the overheads, all of the corporate costs, everything to do with that, AIM listings, lawyers, all that stuff that costs a lot of money to keep a listed company going, have all that covered, and have some money left over to reinvest into new wells?
That is actually what our projections are showing. And I know that sounds like fantasy. I mean, who gets one well that covers all of the cost? But actually, that's what Rost can do, and it can do it at that low fraction of production as well. So that's very much the intention. Yeah, there are some variables, of course. The helium price, for example, that I mentioned before. We have more than one party interest in taking the helium. We have a well that we believe is capable of producing a volume that could probably challenge the PSA. Nice problem to have. But above all, we've dealt with the water, and that was the area that would have been, I think, the hardest one to manage. If that disposal well had not succeeded, if we couldn't take the water off and dispose of it economically, then we have a very different prospect with Rost. But actually, as you observed, we can take the water off. We can dispose of it very effectively 300 yards away, and we're able to do so at one of the higher zones. So, in many ways, Broby could not have gone much better.
Good. Well, just before we go to questions, I have another question to ask you here. So I think it was back earlier in the year you talked about different ways you could fund. You'd had interest from investors, different ways you could fund either other wells in the Hugoton area, but also Ross 2, Ross 3, etc. But I mean, do you expect to call on them, or do you expect to reduce your reliance on external funding as your revenues grow?
I think it's quite flattering to be asked. It's like going to a dance and someone wants to dance for you. It's quite nice to be asked. As recently as last week, someone offered us some money to help us
Right.
develop the Rost area. This is quite common in the US. In the UK, we invest in shares. We take a direct stake in an overall business. In the US, it's not at all uncommon for people to take interest in wells or interest in projects. And you often talk about eighths. I'll take an eighth, or I'll take 2/8 of a well. I mentioned Kansas is quite a small community. What we did in the Hugoton, and I wouldn't really go into detail on the Hugoton, but what we did in the Hugoton by dewatering Nilsson and making that one of the best producing wells in the Hugoton got people interested, and we got third parties invested directly into Nilsson. And the same is happening with Rost. People are interested in what we're doing. So, as a listed company, I mentioned we're looking to move to AIM. Convention would have it that we would raise money in the equity markets. I mean, that's what the capital markets are for. But there is that additional avenue that we have where people would be interested in investing directly in our wells. Now we need to think about whether that makes sense. We need to think about even whether we need the money at all. But again, it's nice to be asked, and it's nice to know that
Yeah.
that's an opportunity going forward.
Well, it's a nice thing to have, isn't it? Than people perhaps buying an eighth, as you say, of a well. You can structure it how you like. From the corporate point of view, it's definitely an interesting prospect. Sort of take part an eighth of a producing asset there. Are you able to talk about? Because obviously Roswell's not producing at the moment, but we've talked about what could come off of that. In terms of revenues at the moment, are they? I don't know what you can say about them, or are they just sort of they're covering their costs in Hugoton, and it's just a small change thing.
I mean, it's smallish. I mean, what I can say is that we have 5 wells in the Hugoton that are in production. They're all connected to Scout's gathering system, meaning that there is a pipe from the wellhead that goes into the
Yeah.
gathering system that is operated by Scout, and from there it goes into Jayhawk where it's processed, and we would receive payments for helium, potentially methane, and also NGLs as well. But it's helium really that has the substantially all of the value that we receive. We don't have to do an awful lot, as long as we keep the well running, so long as we don't put water into the gathering system. A meter will tell Scout how much volume we put through the gathering system, and we will get paid at the end of the month. So we are earning money. We are
Right.
receiving revenue. We're not profitable, as you can probably tell. We're spending time, money, effort on Rost. I mean, that's the focus. But it's quite nice to show that we've proven what we can do over in the Hugoton, and we will come back to the Hugoton at some point. I mean, this is not sort of us sort of moving east to Dodge City permanently. This is the opportunity in the near term, but we'll come back to the Hugoton, and we are producing helium from 5 wells. That will continue for the foreseeable future. But Rost can and should be able to dwarf all of the 5 that we have in the Hugoton. It's a higher pressure well, but most importantly, it's much higher helium composition. Typical Hugoton wells run at sort of 0.6 to 0.8% helium. Now, I know that sounds very small, but given the value of helium and the fact that we are connected into a gathering system, makes that extremely economic for us. But Rost at 5.1%, it's a totally different opportunity altogether.
Well, I think you mentioned to me, I think on the special feature we did, which is really good. I would encourage people to watch that. It's half an hour, real deep dive on the area. And I think you said that the Hugoton is your pension funds, it's your multi-decade opportunity, whereas the Rost is the maybe slightly more risky, but certainly much more upside, as you've just said here, that will really kickstart. So, I mean, if you were to sum up your overall vision for Mendell Helium, what would it be?
Do you know, you've probably given a pretty good summary already. I think every business needs a blend of different opportunities. And the wonderful thing about the Hugoton is there is so much data. I mean, there are decades, literally decades worth of data on the Hugoton, right across the different aspects of the field. And what we know from that data is that these wells last for decades. The wells that we have in the Hugoton, could very easily be, well, very probably be outlasting me and sort of still producing when my children become adults. There's not so much data in Fort Dodge, so I wouldn't want to start saying these wells will last for decades. But what we do know is that the production is much higher, the payback is much faster, and it's the sizzle, it's the excitement on the story. And the vision is not just Rost plus the Hugoton. The vision is many Rosts, expand that Fort Dodge region, build out on what we've proven. The first well is always the hardest, but we've got that disposal well. We've got a well that you saw on the video on on social media is producing gas. So we've done the hard bit. If we can continue to roll out more wells in that area, and if they're all similar or similar characteristics to Rost, we have a really extraordinary company here.
Good. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you. And it's good to hear that people are on the ground who really know their stuff are already expressing interest in Rost and similar. So that must give a bit of confidence there.
That's the best part of it. I think if people who see these things every day, if they're the ones expressing interest, if they're the ones making positive comments, that is an enormous validation. It's one thing for me to go out and say this looks pretty good, but if a guy who's worked in Kansas all his life says, this is the best development opportunity I've ever seen, you write that down and you remember it, because that's that's a pretty powerful statement.
Well, thank you, Nick. I can see there's just maybe 2 or 3 questions that have come in. We are on time, but I do see that our next guest isn't here yet, so we may as well just take a few minutes just to go over a couple of these questions that we've got. So the first one here: does Nick have a peer comparison we can review, and what is his? Well, I've asked you for the long-term vision, but peer comparison.
I mean, the peer comparison is probably best to look at the other listed companies in London that are involved in helium. So you have Helix, you have Mosman, you have Helium One, you have Pulsar, you have Georgina. They all have interesting prospects, and it's not necessary for me to do a sort of straight comparison. I said earlier we're producing helium. They're still in development. They do have the liquidity that we don't. And they have some interesting aspects to the business, but our plan is all about infrastructure. For us, helium is about getting it, about any resource about getting it to market, but for us, helium is all about infrastructure. Anyone who's bought a helium balloon at a fair and let it go, you can see just how difficult this gas is to capture. But if you have an infrastructure that says you can attach a pipe from your wellhead to a gathering system, you take out all of the risk, you take out all of the drama, and it becomes so much lower cost. And that's maybe our biggest single differentiating factor.
Okay, good. Following the positive raise, MDH highlighted the potential for moving. Oh yeah, you've talked about that, so that's well on the way. The moving this into AIM.
Yeah, it's well underway. I spend every day looking at audits and legal due diligence. I can absolutely assure investors we are in progress. These things do take time. It's a lengthy process with advisors, but a bit like Rost and Broby, we are at least where I thought we'd be at this point.
Good.
Some things running slightly ahead, some things running slightly behind, but overall, we're in a very good place.
Good. With production growing, can we expect to see some more direct-to-purchases?
Well, Potentially. We're all very invested. None
Hmm.
of the board are taking a salary. We've all agreed to take no salary until we get to AIM. So we're putting our money, or we're putting our time where our mouth is, and saying to investors that we think it's important we get to AIM, and as a result, we will, I suppose, bet our remuneration on it. And until that day of admission, no one on the board is going to take a salary.
Right. Okay. Good. Good to hear. And finally, I saw a question pop up here. Let me just find it. We'll just finish off with it because it is sort of topical at the moment with what's going on. So you mentioned this about using some of the methane to run a generator to mine Bitcoin. We're seeing a lot of movement in that space, particularly in London at the moment. I don't know. It's probably slightly early days, and maybe it was just a thing you threw out there. But
No,
what's the reality?
we've spent a bit of time on this. So
Okay.
some of our wells in the Hugerton have got a very high methane content, and the methane will go straight into the gathering system.
Yeah.
Um, that's not the case at Rost. There's a much smaller methane content, but essentially it's a waste product. I mean, here in the UK, where natural gas is a key component in many of our lives, that's not necessarily the case over in the US, and the pricing's a whole lot lower. We are not, I believe, going to find it easy to get that methane to market. So we can find a way of using it on site. If there's a way of stripping it from the helium, which obviously gets sold into the market, and we can use that methane to generate a crypto mining operation, well, why
Mm.
not? And for those people who've seen videos of Rost, it's literally 30 yards off a main road. We've got three-phase power. There's telegraph poles going sort of across the field like spaghetti. So it's very well connected. And one of the challenges on Bitcoin or crypto mining is you need a connection, and we have that. We have that at Rost. So if we can use that product, that methane waste product, to create some value, then we absolutely will.
Mm.
What I do want to say though is this will be a very small part of the value of Rost. This will be like a bit of icing on the cake.
Okay.
Rost is going to be about the sale of helium, but I'm sort of fiercely Scottish. I hate waste, and if we can find a way of using a waste product to generate a little bit of money, and as you say, it's very topical. Why not? On our modeling, we get payback a little over a year, so it's quite a good investment if we can find a way of stripping that methane off. So why
Interesting.
not?
Maybe you could look to return Bitcoin to shareholders. I don't know. Don't know how feasible it is. Just an idea I'm throwing
It's
out.
it's
But
it's I mean it's the fashion, isn't it? I mean, we should be holding all of our money in a sort of in a Bitcoin treasury,
apparently, yeah.
or maybe we just mine it. Perhaps we'll produce it for other people. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, I guess it sort of shows the culture of our business where we manage our costs carefully. We generate a return where we can, and this is a little bit of sort of off the wall thinking, but I think it
Sure.
merits a bit more thinking. And if we can make it work, well, look, it's quite a fun add-on, and it will be an add-on.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for your time. So if you can hang around for an hour, you go off air and we can come back and have a round table. But thanks very much. That really shows where we
Pleasure.
are. So I can let you go. Thank you, Nick. So I'll bring